Emma sat at the corner of a dimly lit restaurant, her hands trembling as she smoothed the wrinkles of her thrift store dress. Tonight was supposed to be special, her very first blind date. She had saved carefully for weeks, managing to scrape together only $5. That tiny bill now sat folded tightly in her purse, a reminder of her limits and her courage. She glanced at the menu and felt her heart sink, even the cheapest appetizer was far beyond her budget. Still, she had promised herself she would try. Emma wasn't searching for luxury, she was searching for connection, for someone who might see beyond the numbers in her bank account and notice the depth of her heart. But as the minutes passed, her blind date still hadn't arrived. The restaurant felt larger and colder, filled with laughter and clinking glasses from couples around her. Emma's eyes burned with the familiar sting of disappointment. She tried to hide behind a small smile, pretending she belonged in this world of expensive wine and delicate plates. Across the room, however, someone had noticed her, the man sitting alone at the next table. He wasn't just anyone. He was Daniel Hayes, a single dad and CEO known in the city for his success. Yet tonight, Daniel wasn't focused on profits or contracts. His gaze lingered on the young woman who sat with courage but also quiet desperation. Something about her reminded him of his late wife's resilience, the way she used to face storms with quiet strength. Without realizing it, Daniel leaned forward, curiosity tugging at his heart. Emma fiddled nervously with her phone, pretending to scroll through messages that weren't there. Every minute that passed reminded her that she had been stood up, and the humiliation pressed heavier on her chest. She thought about leaving, slipping out quietly before anyone noticed, but the ache of hunger and the weight of loneliness pinned her to the seat. Just then, a waiter approached with a gentle smile and set down a warm plate of pasta in front of her. Confused, Emma shook her head. "I didn't order this," she whispered. The waiter nodded discreetly toward the next table, where Daniel sat, pretending to be busy with his glass of water. Their eyes met for the first time, and Emma felt a strange mix of embarrassment and gratitude wash over her. She hesitated, was this pity, or kindness? Daniel rose slowly, carrying himself with a quiet confidence, and walked over. "I couldn't help noticing you've been waiting a while," he said softly. His voice carried no judgment, only sincerity. Emma's cheeks burned as she admitted, "I only had $5. I thought maybe it would be enough." Daniel's heart clenched at her honesty, so raw and unguarded. He saw not weakness, but bravery in her words. "Dinner's on me tonight," he replied gently, sliding into the chair across from her. Emma wanted to protest, but the kindness in his eyes silenced her. For the first time that evening, the crushing weight on her shoulders lifted slightly, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The first few minutes between them were cautious, filled with polite smiles and hesitant words. Emma kept tracing the rim of her water glass, unsure why a man like Daniel would bother with someone like her. He carried himself with a quiet strength, his tailored suit and calm demeanor a stark contrast to her trembling hands. But instead of boasting about his accomplishments or wealth, Daniel asked simple questions, about her favorite books, her dreams, her childhood memories. Slowly, Emma relaxed, her laughter slipping out like sunlight after a storm. She told him how she worked double shifts at a diner, how she dreamed of becoming a teacher, and how she sometimes felt invisible in a world that measured worth by money. Daniel listened intently, as though every word she spoke mattered more than the ticking clock or the world outside. For the first time in years, Emma felt seen. What she didn't know was that Daniel, too, carried invisible scars. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise his little daughter alone. Success in business hadn't filled the hollow spaces of grief. He had everything money could buy, yet he felt lonelier than ever. Tonight, across this small table, he saw something money could never purchase: honesty, humility, and the kind of courage that shone even brighter in hardship. As dessert arrived, another quiet gift from Daniel, Emma's eyes welled with tears she tried to hide. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. Daniel smiled gently, pausing before answering, because I know what it feels like to be broken, and I also know what it feels like when someone chooses to help you stand again. Emma's chest tightened at his words, as though he had touched a place she'd long kept hidden. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not with pity, but with genuine understanding. She blinked quickly, brushing away a tear before it could fall. The restaurant around them faded, the soft clinking of glasses and distant laughter became nothing more than background music to the fragile moment unfolding between two strangers. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but warm. He told her about his daughter, Lily, and how she had taught him the meaning of resilience. "She's only 7, but she's braver than most adults I know," he said with a faint smile. Emma's face softened, her heart swelling at the tenderness in his eyes when he spoke of his child. "You must be a good father," she murmured. Daniel chuckled, a little embarrassed. "I'm trying. Some days, I feel like I'm failing. But then she hugs me and tells me I'm her hero, and somehow, I keep going." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of his struggle even if she hadn't lived it herself. She admired the way he carried both strength and vulnerability in equal measure. For Daniel, the dinner wasn't about rescuing someone in need, it was about finding a connection that reminded him he wasn't alone either. For Emma, it wasn't just about receiving kindness, it was about realizing her worth was never tied to the $5 in her purse, but to the heart she carried inside. As the evening stretched on, laughter replaced her earlier tears, and hope slipped quietly back into her life like a long-lost friend returning home. When the check finally arrived, Emma instinctively reached for her purse, her fingers brushing the folded $5 bill as though it might somehow restore her dignity. But Daniel gently placed his hand over hers, stopping her. "Keep it," he said softly, his eyes steady. "One day, you'll use it for something that matters more than tonight." For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. That small gesture, simple yet profound, carried more weight than 1,000 grand displays of wealth. She slipped the bill back into her purse, her throat tight with emotion. As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them, the city lights glowing like scattered stars. Emma shivered slightly, and Daniel instinctively shrugged off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, startled by the warmth that wasn't just from the coat but from his presence. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Daniel paused, searching for the right words. "Because sometimes the people who seem to have the least, are the ones who carry the most inside them," he replied. His honesty left her speechless. They stood there for a long while, two souls who had walked into the evening as strangers but were leaving it with something far more valuable than either had expected. Emma didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether she'd see him again or if this night would become nothing more than a bittersweet memory, but for the first time in years, she felt worthy of being chosen. And Daniel, in his own quiet way, felt that perhaps his heart was finally ready to heal. The following week, Emma found herself standing outside a small coffee shop, the same $5 bill still tucked safely in her purse. She hadn't spent it, not because she couldn't, but because it had come to mean something more. It was no longer just money, it was a reminder that even when life seemed unbearably heavy, kindness could rewrite the story. She smiled at the thought of Daniel, at how a stranger had stepped in on the worst night of her life and turned it into something unforgettable. What she didn't expect was to see him again so soon. As she walked inside, a little girl with bright eyes and golden braids bumped into her. "Sorry," the child giggled before running toward the man waiting at a corner table. Emma's heart stuttered. "Daniel." He looked up, surprise and something softer lighting his face when he saw her. "Emma," he said warmly, rising to greet her, while his daughter peeked curiously from behind him. In that instant, Emma realized that life had brought her back to this moment for a reason. It wasn't just about one night or one meal, it was about second chances, about hope finding its way through brokenness. Daniel introduced his daughter, and Emma knelt to shake the little girl's hand, her smile genuine. The world outside was still harsh, bills still waited to be paid, and her struggles hadn't vanished overnight, but somehow, they didn't feel as heavy anymore. Because Emma now carried the knowledge that she wasn't invisible, that she was worthy of kindness and love. And sometimes, one act of generosity was all it took to remind two broken hearts that healing was possible.